Okay, we're going to jump right into a question that seems, almost too simple. But the answer we're going to explore today, based on the historical record, actually challenges one of the most fundamental facts you probably learned about American history.
So let's just start with that. When was the last person held in traditional slavery, chattel slavery, freed in the United States? I want you to really think back, maybe to your 5th grade history class. You almost certainly know the answer they taught you.
And yeah, you're probably thinking 1865, right? The Civil War ends, the good guys win, and the 13th Amendment is ratified. Slavery is abolished. It's the date we all learn. It's in every textbook. But what if I told you that date is just wrong? And not by a little bit, by decades. The source material for this explainer shows us the real story is so much more complicated, and it lasts much, much longer.
To really get why, we first need to look at that simplified story, the version of history that became the standard narrative for pretty much everyone.
And here it is. This is the timeline we all know. Slavery ends in 1865. Then there's this brief adjustment period, Reconstruction, then the bad times of Jim Crow, which are eventually fixed by the Civil Rights Movement. See how neat and tidy that is? It's a clean story where each problem has a solution. But, and this is what the source material argues, this super clean timeline leaves a massive, gaping hole, a huge question. If the system was fixed over 150 years ago and then fixed again in the 1960s, why do we still see such deep, persistent economic and racial inequality today? The standard story just doesn't really have a good answer for that.
Well, the answer, according to our sources, is that slavery never really ended. It just evolved. It changed its name and its methods, and in some ways, it became even more brutal.
And it all comes down to a loophole, a massive loophole, hidden in plain sight, right inside the 13th Amendment itself. Look at the wording. Slavery was abolished, except as a punishment for a crime. That one little clause, that single exception, became the legal key to re-enslaving millions.
So what happened? Well, immediately after the Civil War, Southern states jumped on that loophole. They passed these laws called Black Codes. Now, these weren't just about segregation. They were designed to make everyday life illegal if you were black. Things like being unemployed, or walking by a railroad track, or even just quitting your job. Suddenly, these were crimes that could get you arrested.
And this is the next step in the system. With the jails now filling up with people convicted of these brand new crimes, states started leasing out their prisoners, who were almost all black men, as a super cheap, disposable labor force to private companies, like coal mines and plantations.
And at the very same time, you have this other system popping up called debt peonage. Here's how it worked. A black man gets arrested for something bogus like vagrancy, and he gets hit with this huge fine he can't possibly pay. Well, a local farmer or a business owner steps in, pays the fine for him, and in return, that man is forced to work off the debt. A debt that, funny enough, just kept growing and growing, making it impossible to ever leave.
It was a perfect trap, a vicious cycle. It started with a bogus arrest. That led to forced labor. And if you tried to escape, well, now you're not just a runaway, you're a criminal who's breaking a contract, and you get rearrested, which just starts the whole cycle over again, usually with an even longer sentence. It was inescapable.
And the scale of this is just staggering. The source estimates that in the decades after the Civil War, this system of neo-slavery pulled in more than 800,000 people. I mean, this was not some fringe practice. This was a cornerstone of the entire Southern economy.
And look, don't think this is just some modern historian looking back and judging. People knew what was happening at the time. A U.S. Department of Justice report from back then concluded that this system was often worse than pre-war slavery. And the reason why is just chilling. An enslaved person before the war was an investment. They cost a lot of money, but a leased convict, they were disposable. There was literally no financial incentive to keep them alive.
So if this absolutely brutal system lasted for more than 75 years after the Civil War, what on earth finally brought it to an end? Well, the answer is probably not what you think. It wasn't some great moral awakening.
It was World War II. The attack on Pearl Harbor throws America onto the world stage as this great defender of freedom. But enemy propaganda from Japan and Germany immediately started pointing out the hypocrisy, right? How can America claim to be fighting for freedom overseas when it's tolerating actual slavery at home? That international pressure, that bad PR, forced the Justice Department to finally crack down, not really for moral reasons, but as a matter of war strategy.
So let this sink in for a second. The end of legal, state-sanctioned chattel slavery in the United States was not 1865. It was 1942.
That is within the living memory of millions of people. This isn't ancient history we're talking about. This is modern history. Your grandparents were likely alive when this was happening.
And look, getting this timeline right isn't just about correcting a date in a textbook. The source argues that this is absolutely fundamental to understanding the reality of America today.
I mean, changing the end date of slavery from 1865 to 1942 changes everything. It means that for generations, black families had their wealth and their labor systematically stolen from them, not in the distant past, but for nearly a century after they were supposed to be free. It shows how the criminal justice system was weaponized to create a permanent underclass, and it reveals how the whole myth of black criminality was manufactured to justify it all.
And the source suggests that this pattern didn't just stop in 1942. This quote from one of Nixon's top advisors is absolutely stunning. It reveals how decades later, the exact same tactic, using the law to criminalize and control a specific community, was just repurposed for the war on drugs. It's a direct line from the black codes to modern mass incarceration.
So that leaves us with this final question to think about. If the real starting point for freedom and equality isn't 150 years ago, but just about 80 years ago, how does that completely reshape our understanding of progress, of justice, and of the American story itself? It really suggests the past is a lot closer than any of us think.